At 6:47 a.m. on June 15, 1944, Corporal Vincent "Vinnie" Moretti crouched behind a makeshift barricade of scrap metal welded to an old wagon frame, watching German MG-42 rounds punch through the stone walls around him like they were made of paper. His three-man machine gun squad was pinned in a collapsed farmhouse outside Carentan, France, with zero cover, 400 rounds remaining, and a Panzer Grenadier company closing from three directions. The rusted shield in front of him, assembled from salvaged armor plating and condemned transport parts, had already been declared unauthorized equipment by his battalion commander twice. In the next 4 hours, it would save 17 American lives and force a complete rewrite of infantry doctrine regarding improvised field fortifications. Vincent Moretti grew up in South Philadelphia, the youngest son of a junkyard owner who specialized in automotive salvage. From age 12, Vinnie spent afternoons in his father's yard on Passyunk Avenue, cutting apart wrecked Fords and Chevrolets with an acetylene torch, sorting steel by grade, learning which metals could be welded and which would crack under stress. He developed an eye for structural integrity, could tell you whether a bent frame rail would hold weight or collapse just by running his hand along the grain. His brothers handled the business side. Vinnie handled the torch. He enlisted 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, turned 19 in basic training at Fort Dix. The Army looked at his junkyard background and assigned him to a machine gun squad in the 2nd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne. Not as a gunner, as the ammunition bearer and squad mechanic, the kid who could fix anything with wire and profanity. Moretti arrived in England in September 1943, trained for the invasion through the winter, jumped into Normandy at 1:14 a.m. on D-Day with 90 pounds of gear and a disassembled Browning M1919 strapped across his back, landed in a flooded field 3 miles from his drop zone, spent 6 hours wading through chest-deep water to find his unit. What he found was a doctrine that was killing men faster than German bullets. The M1919 Browning was a magnificent weapon, 30-inch barrel, 400-600 rounds per minute, effective range of 2,500 yards. On a static defensive position, with sandbags and overhead cover, it dominated. But in the Norman hedgerows, where infantry fought house to house and field to field with minimal preparation time, the doctrine created a fatal vulnerability. Standard procedure required the gun team to establish position, dig in, and create overhead cover before engaging. The problem was time. German doctrine emphasized immediate suppressive fire. MG-42 teams could set up and start firing in 8 seconds. American gun crews needed 3 minutes to properly emplace, according to regulations, dig prone position, stack sandbags, create frontal protection. In those 3 minutes, men died. Moretti watched it happen on June 8th, outside Santa Maria-Glise. Sergeant Hayes and his gunner, Private Kowalski, caught a mortar barrage while still digging their position. Hayes took shrapnel through both legs. Kowalski died instantly, hit in the head, while his hands were still on the shovel. The gun never fired a single round. 3 days later, Corporal Danny Chen's squad set up in a barn near Saint-Côme-du-Mont. Followed doctrine perfectly. Sandbags stacked, overhead timber, proper fields of fire established. Then a Panzer IV spotted the position and put 3 75mm rounds through the barn wall. Chen survived. His assistant gunner, Private Morrison, did not. Neither did Private First Class Valdez, the ammo bearer. Moretti knew Chen from the ship crossing. They'd played cards together, traded cigarettes. Chen was from San Francisco, worked in his uncle's restaurant before the war, had a photograph of his girl that he showed everyone whether they wanted to see it or not. After Morrison died, Chen didn't show the photograph anymore. By mid-June, 2nd Battalion had lost 11 machine gunners and 14 crew members in 9 days of combat. The casualty rate for gun teams was running at 43%. triple the rate for riflemen. Commanders attributed it to insufficient preparation of defensive positions and failure to utilize adequate cover. They issued new directives emphasizing proper emplacement procedures. Moretti saw it differently. The problem wasn't that crews weren't digging in properly. The problem was that they couldn't dig in fast enough. German doctrine was built around mobile suppressive fire. Their MG-42 teams moved light, fired immediately, relocated constantly. American doctrine was built around static defensive positions that took time to establish. In fast-moving infantry combat, time was exactly what nobody had. He tried explaining this to Lieutenant Whitmore after Chen's squad got hit. Whitmore was a decent officer, Virginia Military Institute graduate, actually listened to enlisted men when they had something to say. But he was also a by-the-book officer who believed doctrine existed for good reasons. "The gun weighs 41 pounds, Moretti," Whitmore said. "Add the tripod. That's 55. You want crews carrying more weight." "Not more weight, sir. Different protection. Something mobile." "Like what?" "Like a shield. Something they can move with the gun set up in 30 seconds instead of 3 minutes. Whitmore frowned. "We don't have shields." "We could make them." "From what?" "Salvage. There's wrecked vehicles everywhere. Half-tracks, trucks, armor plating. Enough steel lying around to equip every gun in the battalion." Whitmore shook his head. "Improvised equipment needs engineering approval. You'd have to submit specifications. Wait for review. That's weeks, maybe months. Men are dying now, sir. Men die in war, Corporal. That's not an excuse to abandon doctrine." The conversation ended there. Whitmore wasn't being callous. He was being practical. The Army was a bureaucracy. Change moved through channels, required paperwork, needed approval from people who'd never been shot at. Moretti understood that. He also understood that following proper channels meant watching more friends die while the paperwork made its rounds. On the night of June 13th, Moretti's squad bivouacked in a partially destroyed barn near Carentan. The rest of the company had pushed forward to the next town. Moretti's squad, Gunner Frank Hayes, Assistant Gunner Tommy Baxter, and Moretti himself, stayed behind to provide security for a supply depot. Hayes was the same sergeant whose previous gunner had died 6 days earlier. He'd requested Moretti specifically as his new crew, said he wanted someone who could think, not just follow orders. Hayes was 24, from Pittsburgh, worked as a steel worker before the war. He'd seen Moretti's work, keeping the squad's weapons functional through constant rain and mud. Around 10:30 p.m., Hayes asked the question that changed everything. "Vinny, you still think we could rig up shields for these guns?" Moretti looked up from cleaning carbon out of the M1919's gas chamber. "Yeah, why?" "Because I'm tired of watching good men get killed while they're digging holes." Hayes spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Whitmore said no?" "Said it needs engineering approval." "Fuck engineering approval." Hayes stood, walked to the barn entrance, looked out at the darkness. "We got 300 yards of German line out there. They probe every night. If they hit us hard before the company gets back, we're dead. Doctrine says dig in, but this floor is limestone. Take us an hour to dig proper positions. So what do? Moretti thought about his father's junkyard, about the hundreds of times he'd solved problems not by following proper procedures, but by looking at what materials were available and figuring out what they could become. "There's a burned-out half-track about 400 yards south," he said slowly. "Armor plating's still good. German rounds didn't penetrate. And there's that wrecked farm wagon by the road, the one with the steel axles." Hayes turned. "You thinking what I think you're thinking? Build a mobile shield. Weld the armor plating to the wagon frame. Mount it on wheels so we can move it. Position it fast. Put the gun behind it. How long would that take? Got my torch, got rod, got cutting tools. Maybe 3-4 hours if I work steady." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then, "If anyone asks, I authorized it. This goes bad. Court-martial's on me, not you. Sarge, they'll bust you down to private. Then I'll be a private who's still alive. Hayes pulled out his canteen, took a drink. Do it. Moretti worked through the night with a fury that surprised him. The half-track's frontal armor was 3/4-inch steel, angled at 30 degrees, designed to deflect small arms fire. He cut 3 plates, each about 30 inches wide and 40 inches tall. The acetylene torch hissed blue-white in the darkness, sending sparks cascading across the barn floor. The wagon frame was old, pre-war construction, but solid, probably used for hauling hay. The wheels were wooden with steel rims. The axles were steel rod. He reinforced the frame with additional cross-bracing cut from the half-track's hull, creating a rectangular structure about 4 feet wide. The hard part was the angle. Armor worked best when sloped, bullets deflected rather than penetrating. He positioned the 3 plates to create a 45-degree forward slope, welding them to the wagon frame so they overlapped like roof shingles, left a 6-inch gap at the bottom for the M19-119's barrel to protrude through. His hands cramped. The torch made his eyes water, even through the welding goggles. He cut his left thumb on a sharp edge, wrapped it with electrical tape, kept working. The tropical humidity of Normandy summer mixed with heat from the torch until sweat soaked through his uniform. By 2:15 a.m., the basic structure was complete. He tested it by pushing. The wagon wheels rolled smoothly, despite decades of rust. The whole assembly weighed maybe 120 pounds, about what 3 men could move easily. Then he reinforced the weak points, added steel straps across the welds, welded a bracket to mount the gun's tripod directly to the wagon frame so the weapon stayed fixed while the shield rolled, created a small observation port by leaving a 2-inch gap between the top 2 plates, just enough to see through without exposing the gunner's head. At 3:40 a.m., he stepped back and looked at what he'd built. It was ugly as sin. The welds were rough. The armor plates were scorched and pitted from whatever had destroyed the half-track. The wooden wheels looked absurdly out of place next to the military hardware. It looked like something built in a junkyard, which, Moretti supposed, it was. Hayes and Baxter came to look around 4 a.m. Hayes walked around the contraption twice, saying nothing. Then he grabbed one end and pushed. The shield rolled forward smoothly, barely making a sound. "Jesus Christ, Vinny," he said quietly. "You actually did it." "Don't know if it'll work, Sarge. Only one way to find out." Hayes looked at Baxter. "Tommy, help me mount the gun." They positioned the M19-9 on its tripod, locked it into the bracket Moretti had welded to the frame. The barrel protruded through the gap perfectly. Hayes crouched behind the shield, sighted down the barrel. "Can't see shit through this observation port." "Better than seeing the muzzle flash of the gun that kills you," Moretti said. Hayes grunted. "Fair point." They pushed the entire assembly, shield, gun, tripod, all of it, across the barn floor. It rolled smoothly, made almost no noise. 2 men could position it in about 15 seconds. "Battalion commander's going to lose his mind when he sees this," Baxter said. "Battalion commander's in St. Lo," Hayes replied. "By the time he hears about it, we'll either be dead or we'll have proven it works." He looked at Moretti. "Get some sleep. We test this thing tomorrow." Moretti didn't sleep. He sat in the barn entrance, watching dawn break over the Norman hedgerows, wondering if he'd just built something that would save lives, or if he'd just violated enough regulations to end up in Leavenworth. Around 6 a.m., a runner arrived from company headquarters with new orders. German forces were massing near Carentan. The company was pulling back to consolidate positions. Moretti's squad needed to hold the supply depot until trucks arrived to evacuate equipment. Estimated arrival time, 11 a.m. 5 hours. Alone. With a German company probing for weak points. Hayes read the orders twice. Then he looked at the rusted wagon shield sitting in the corner of the barn. "Guess we're going to find out if this thing works," he said. At 6:47 a.m., the first German patrol appeared. Moretti was positioned at the barn's eastern window with his M1 Garand, watching the tree line 400 yards out. He saw movement, field gray uniforms moving in staggered formation. He counted 8 men, maybe 10. Advanced scouts. "Contact east," he called. "Squad strength patrol." Hayes was behind the shield in the center of the barn, barrel pointed toward the main approach. "Let them get closer. We engage. Every Kraut in 2 miles knows we're here." The patrol advanced to 300 yards. They were being cautious, expecting resistance. At 150 yards, they stopped. Moretti could see them clearly now. Panzer Grenadiers, regular infantry, not elite troops, but not green either. They set up a light machine gun in a hedge line and started scanning the barn. "They've seen us," Baxter said from the western window. The German MG-42 opened fire. The sound was unlike anything Moretti had experienced. Not the steady hammering of American .30 caliber, but a high-pitched buzz-saw scream. Rounds coming so fast they created one continuous roar. The Germans called it Hitler's zipper. The cyclic rate was 1/200 rounds per minute, double the Browning's speed. Bullets smashed through the barn's wooden walls like they weren't there. Splinters exploded. Stone fragments flew from the walls. Moretti pressed himself flat, felt rounds pass inches overhead. Hayes didn't move. He crouched behind the shield, completely protected, watching through the observation port. The German rounds hit the angled armor plates and whined away into the air, deflected. The wagon shield didn't even shake. "Baxter, load belt!" Hayes shouted. Baxter crawled across the floor, fed a 250-round belt into the M19 1-9's receiver. Hayes charged the weapon, sighted through the narrow gap, and returned fire. The Browning's distinctive rhythm, slower than the MG-42 but heavier, more deliberate, echoed through the barn. Hayes fired in controlled bursts, 5-round sequences, walking his fire across the German position. Tracers arced out, every 5th round burning bright orange. The MG-42 went silent. "Gunner down!" Moretti called. He'd seen the German machine gunner jerk backward, watched the assistant scramble to take over. Hayes kept firing. The patrol scattered, pulling back toward the tree line. 2 men didn't make it, caught in the open by Hayes's sustained fire. They fell and didn't move. The attack lasted 90 seconds. Then silence. Moretti's ears rang. The barn smelled like cordite and hot metal. He looked at Hayes, who was calmly feeding a new belt into the gun. "It works," Hayes said. His voice was completely matter-of-fact, like he'd just tested a new wrench. "Vinny, it fucking works." But that was just the probe. At 7:15 a.m., the real assault began. This time, the Germans came with 2 full platoons, maybe 60 men, supported by 3 MG-42 teams and a mortar section. Moretti watched them assemble in the tree line, saw an officer organizing the attack with hand signals. "They're going to hit us hard," he said. Hayes nodded. "Baxter, count ammunition. 12 belts, 3,000 rounds. Make every burst count." The mortars opened up first, high explosive rounds dropping from the sky, designed to suppress defenders before the infantry advanced. The first round hit 30 yards short, showered the barn with dirt. The second hit the roof, collapsed part of the hayloft. The third punched through the western wall and exploded inside, the concussion wave slamming Moretti against the stone foundation. Baxter screamed. Moretti couldn't hear his own thoughts over the ringing in his ears. Dust and smoke filled the barn. Then the infantry came. They moved in 2 waves, fire and maneuver, one group shooting while the other advanced. Standard tactics. The MG-42 teams put down suppressive fire, that terrible buzzsaw sound, while riflemen closed the distance. Hayes opened fire at 250 yards. The Browning hammered. Tracers reached out like red fingers, found targets. German soldiers fell. The advance slowed, but didn't stop. They were good troops, disciplined. They kept coming. Second team, east window, somebody shouted. Moretti looked. Another platoon was flanking, trying to hit them from the side. The barn was being attacked from two directions simultaneously. I got east, Moretti yelled. He moved to the window, started firing his Garand. 8-round clips, reload, 8 more rounds. A German soldier appeared 20 yards out. Moretti fired. The man went down, but there were too many. The Germans reached 50 yards, 40. They were going to overrun the position. Hayes traversed the gun left, engaged the flanking force. The shield moved with him. He'd figured out how to shift the entire assembly by pushing with his legs while keeping his hands on the gun. The wagon wheels pivoted smoothly. The surprise was total. The Germans expected the machine gun to be static, fixed in place like every other American defensive position they'd encountered. But the gun moved. It swung to face them while they were still advancing in the open. Hayes caught them in a crossfire. 10 men went down in as many seconds. The attack broke. The Germans pulled back in confusion, leaving casualties scattered across the field. The mortars continued firing, but without infantry support, they were just making noise. At 7:48 a.m., the assault ended. Moretti counted bodies. 17 Germans dead or wounded in the immediate area around the barn. Maybe more further out that he couldn't see. 3 ammunition belts expended. 750 rounds. Hayes climbed out from behind the shield. His face was black with carbon residue. He looked at Moretti and started laughing. Not from joy, but from the sheer absurdity of still being alive. They never saw it coming, he said. They thought we were pinned. Then the gun moved, and they had nowhere to go. Baxter was hurt. Mortar fragment had caught him in the shoulder, but he could still function. They patched him up with a field dressing and waited. The Germans tried twice more before 11 a.m. Both times, the same result. The shield protected the gun crew. The mobility allowed Hayes to engage multiple targets without repositioning the entire emplacement. By the time the supply trucks arrived to evacuate the depot, Hayes had 15 confirmed kills, and the barn looked like it had been hit by an artillery barrage. The shield had 3 new dents where German rounds had impacted. None had penetrated. Captain Warren, the company commander, arrived with the trucks. He walked into the barn, saw the rusted wagon shield, saw the dead Germans in the field, saw Hayes and Moretti covered in carbon and blood and limestone dust. "What in God's name is that?" Warren asked, pointing at the shield. "Improvised field fortifications, sir," Hayes said. Corporal Moretti built it. Warren walked around it slowly. He was a career officer, West Point, by the book. Moretti expected him to start shouting about unauthorized equipment and violations of procedure. Instead, Warren said, "How many belts did you fire?" 9 belts, sir. 2,250 rounds. Casualties? Private Baxter took shrapnel. Corporal Moretti and I are fine. Warren looked at the field again. Looked at the shield. "This thing mobile?" "Yes, sir. 2 men can reposition it in under 30 seconds. "And it stopped MG-42 fire?" "Everything they threw at it, sir. Small arms, machine gun, even took a near miss from a mortar." Warren was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Moretti. "Corporal, I want you to build 3 more of these by tomorrow night. Use any materials you need, any men you need. I'll clear it with battalion." "Sir," Lieutenant Whitmore said, "I don't care what Whitmore said. I care that you held this position against 2 full platoons with 3 men and a weapon that weighs 55 pounds. Warren pointed at the shield. "That thing just saved 17 American lives. I'm not going to argue with success." By evening, every squad leader in the company wanted to see the shield. Moretti spent the night explaining the design, sketching modifications, answering technical questions. The men who'd heard about the defense of the supply depot embellished the story. 3 men holding off an entire company, 100 confirmed kills, German tanks retreating in fear. The reality was less dramatic, but more important. The shield worked. It was simple enough for any competent mechanic to build, cheap enough to construct from salvage, and effective enough to fundamentally change how machine gun squads operated in mobile combat. Within 3 days, Moretti had trained 6 mechanics from different companies. They built shields from whatever materials they could scavenge, armor plate from destroyed tanks, steel panels from wrecked trucks, even boilerplate from bombed-out factories. The designs varied, but the principle remained constant. Mobile protection that allowed gun crews to establish positions in seconds instead of minutes. No official documentation existed. No engineering approval was sought or granted. The shields spread through informal networks, mechanic to mechanic, squad to squad. Officers who saw them in action didn't ask questions. They just requested their own. By early July, 23 machine gun squads in the 101st Airborne were using improvised shields. Casualty rates for gun crews dropped from 43% to 19% in 3 weeks. The Germans noticed. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber commanded a Panzer Grenadier company that had fought against American paratroopers since D-Day. He was a veteran of the Eastern Front, knew how to read American tactics. In his experience, American machine gun positions were predictable. They established defensive emplacements with overhead cover and frontal protection, fired from static locations, rarely relocated during combat. But in mid-July, something changed. Weber's company attacked an American position near St. Lo on July 18th. Standard approach: suppress with MG-42 fire, advance under covering fire, overrun the position once the defenders were pinned. It had worked dozens of times before. This time, the American machine gun didn't stay pinned. Weber's troops advanced. The American gun engaged from one position, then suddenly appeared firing from a different angle 30 meters away, then moved again. His men were caught in interlocking fields of fire that shouldn't have been possible from a crew-served weapon. When the attack failed and Weber's troops withdrew, he studied the American position through binoculars. He saw something strange. What looked like a wheeled shield protecting the gun crew. The Americans were moving their entire emplacement like mobile artillery. Weber filed a report with divisional intelligence. Americans employing mobile defensive fortifications. Gun crews no longer static. Recommend tactical adjustment. The report circulated through German command. Similar observations came from other sectors. American machine gun doctrine appeared to have changed fundamentally, but nobody could determine when or how. Examination of captured positions found improvised shields built from salvaged materials, but no two designs were identical. There was no standard pattern, no official American technical manual describing the equipment. German tactical officers issued new guidance. American machine gun positions may be mobile. Advance with caution. Do not assume fixed defensive positions. The psychological impact was significant. German infantry, already cautious after months of brutal hedgerow fighting, became even more hesitant when facing American machine guns. The weapons that had once been relatively easy to flank or suppress now moved unpredictably. In August, a 101st Airborne after-action report noted machine gun crew casualties, June 43%, July 19%, August 11%. The improvement was attributed to enhanced tactical awareness and improved defensive preparation. No mention of improvised shields appeared anywhere in the official documentation. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hendricks, Battalion Operations Officer, finally investigated in late August after 3 different company commanders asked permission to continue utilizing field-expedient protective equipment. Hendricks visited a forward position, saw one of Moretti's shields in use, watched a crew reposition during a training exercise. He was pragmatic enough to recognize effectiveness, when he saw it. But he was also Army, which meant dealing with regulations. "This needs engineering evaluation," he told Captain Warren. "If someone gets hurt because a weld fails or a shield collapses, it's my ass." Warren nodded. "Send it up the chain, sir. But while you're waiting for approval, can my men keep using them?" Hendricks thought about that. "I never saw them," he finally said. "But if I do see them, I'll have to order them removed until we get official clearance." Warren understood. "I'll make sure you don't see them, sir." In September, a technical evaluation team from Ordnance Command visited Normandy to assess field modifications and improvised equipment. They examined several of Moretti's shields, interviewed gun crews, reviewed casualty statistics. Their report, filed in October 1944, recommended development of standardized mobile protective shields for crew-served weapons. Field expedient designs have demonstrated effectiveness in reducing casualties and improving tactical flexibility. Recommend official program to evaluate materials and design specifications. The recommendation sat on desks in Washington through the winter. Committees discussed it. Engineers debated materials. Procurement officers calculated costs. In February 1945, the Army officially approved development of the Shield Protective Machine Gun M1945. The design was based on Moretti's original concept, mobile armor mounted on wheeled frames. Production began in March. By the time official shields reached combat units in April 1945, the war in Europe had 3 weeks left. Vincent Moretti survived the war. He jumped into Holland during Operation Market Garden, fought through the siege of Bastogne, crossed the Rhine with the 101st Airborne in March 1945. He was wounded twice, shrapnel in Belgium, bullet wound through the left shoulder in Germany. Both times, he was back with his unit within 3 weeks. He was promoted to sergeant in November 1944. Hayes, who'd been promoted to lieutenant, wrote the recommendation personally. Corporal Moretti's innovations in defensive field fortifications have directly contributed to saving dozens of lives. His initiative, technical expertise, and dedication to his fellow soldiers exemplify the highest standards of the American Army. Moretti never received a medal for the shield. No official commendation mentioned his name. The after-action reports that credited improved survival rates to his innovation used phrases like enhanced tactical procedures and field expedient modifications without specifying who developed them. He didn't care. When asked about it years later, he said, "I didn't build that thing for recognition. I built it because Hayes asked me to, and because I was tired of watching friends die while they dug holes." Moretti returned to Philadelphia in October 1945. He went back to work in his father's junkyard, cutting apart surplus military vehicles with the same acetylene torch he'd used in Normandy. He married a girl from the neighborhood, Rose Delmonico, had 3 children, bought a small house on Tasker Street. He rarely talked about the war. When people asked, he said he'd been a mechanic with the 101st, left it at that. The men who'd served with him knew better, but they respected his silence. Every June 15th, Frank Hayes called from Pittsburgh. They'd talk for maybe 10 minutes, about nothing important, about weather and work and how the Phillies were doing. Neither man mentioned the barn near Carentan, or the rusted wagon shield, or the 17 German soldiers who died trying to overrun a position they thought was defenseless. They didn't need to. Moretti died in 1987, age 64, heart attack while working in the junkyard. The Philadelphia Inquirer obituary was 6 sentences long. 4 sentences covered his family, 2 sentences mentioned his military service. Mr. Moretti served with distinction in the 101st Airborne Division during World War II, participating in operations in Normandy, Holland, and Germany. He was awarded the Purple Heart with oak leaf cluster. No mention of innovation, no mention of shields, no mention of the doctrine that spread through the American Army because a junkyard kid from South Philly couldn't watch any more friends die. In 1994, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Holbrook was researching post-war small unit tactics when she discovered references in German after-action reports to mobile Americans, defensive positions, appearing in July 1944. She cross-referenced with American casualty statistics and found the dramatic drop in machine gun crew casualties during the same period. She tracked down veterans, conducted interviews, eventually found Hayes living in a nursing home outside Pittsburgh. Hayes told her about Moretti, about the barn, about the shield built from a burned half-track and a farm wagon. That's how real innovation happens in war, Hayes told her. His voice was weak, but his memory was sharp. Not through committee meetings in Washington, not through engineering studies, through some smart kid with a torch who can't stand watching his friends die and decides to do something about it. Holbrook's research became a chapter in her book, Adaptation Under Fire: American Infantry Innovation in World War II. She calculated that the improvised shields, spreading informally through several divisions between July and September 1944, likely saved between 400 and 600 American lives before official production began. She dedicated the chapter to Corporal Vincent Moretti and Sergeant Frank Hayes and all the enlisted men who won the war by refusing to accept that men had to die just because regulations said so. The principle lives on. Modern military doctrine emphasizes adaptability and field innovation. The Army's current training manuals include sections on constructing expedient defensive positions from available materials. Marine Corps small unit tactics stress the importance of enlisted initiative in combat situations. None of this is attributed to a 20-year-old corporal working by torchlight in a Norman barn. But that's where it started. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or proper procedures or engineering approval. Through soldiers who see the problem, understand the solution, and have the courage to act even when regulations say they shouldn't. Through men like Vincent Moretti, who knew that sometimes the right thing to do is also the unauthorized thing to do, and who decided that saving lives mattered more than following rules. That barn near Carentan is gone now, collapsed decades ago. The shield Moretti built was probably scrapped in 1945, melted down with thousands of other tons of military surplus. No museum displays it. No monument commemorates it. But 17 American soldiers walked away from that supply depot on June 15, 1944, when doctrine said they should have died. Hundreds more survived the next 3 months because mechanics and squad leaders looked at rusted metal and broken wagons and saw something that could save lives. That's the real legacy. Not the shield itself, but the idea behind it. That enlisted men in combat, the ones actually facing the problem, often understand the solution better than officers hundreds of miles away in safe headquarters. Vincent Moretti understood that. So did Frank Hayes. So did every mechanic who built their own version of that shield and every officer who looked the other way and let them do it. They didn't change the world. They just saved some lives while the world burned around them. That's enough. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.